Hi, my name is Serrano, and I'm a two-time world champion.
And I'm Amanda, the real deal Serrano, and I'm a 5-time full division world champion. We have 2 different styles. Like, I'm a southpaw, I'm the brawler. I'm like, get in and I just want to finish it quick, and she's the orthodox and she's the boxer. She has a little more style. She doesn't get hit as much as I do. It's so competitive. When I'm sparring with her, training is so competitive between both of us, because I always want to be like, I'm the little sister, but I'm the better one. And she wants to be like, no, I'm the older sister, and I'm going to show, I started this, I'm going to show you how it's done. Good, fun, clean competition between both of us. We bring the best out of each other, and that's why we are the way we are today. Multiple world champions.
I've been fighting since 2003, when there was about maybe 10 females on like the whole entire world. So I was 19, just had a baby, wanted to lose weight. My boyfriend Jordan owned a boxing gym, and he was like, let's try this way. It's easier, so we did that. I was very determined, and he saw that in me, and he was like, let's just keep it on, and it went from there. Money-wise, it was a joke. Getting the recognition was a joke, because everyone thought female boxing was like foxy boxers.
I didn't start till I was 18 years old. That's why it took me a little longer to actually get into it, because I saw her struggle. I was inspired by her determination, and I said, let me try. So I signed up for the New York Golden Gloves, which is the biggest tournament here in New York. And 3 months later, I had my first fight. People are starting to recognize us. The big organizations are starting to recognize female boxing, and it's getting a lot better. I got paid for my pro debut, like what she got paid, and
title fight.
Yeah, title fight. Once that door opens, we're gonna come in full force and running, and we're gonna take all the men out of business.
And we look better doing it.
Sometimes I think about it now, and I talk to my trainer about it, and I'm like, wow, to think we started my career being an opponent. And look at me now. I'm a 5-time world champion, full division. I'm like the best female boxers. If they mention female boxing, they say our names. They have to mention our names.
To still have the love for one another, it's amazing, because it's a very competitive sport. When we train and we fight, we don't fight for each other, we just fight against everyone else. So we take that very seriously, and we bring it outside, and people see that respect that we have for one another. Especially in Puerto Rico, there was no one to look up to. It was always the same names: Trinidad, Cotto, Camacho. So now, Amanda's like a household name, and now I'm coming into the front, and everyone is like, you don't understand, like these little girls got someone to look up to.
We represent Puerto Ricans because we're proud Puerto Ricans ourselves, being the first female to headline a card in Puerto Rico. And it was time. Why not fight in a place where they genuinely love you? So it was great.
The fans love us, everyone greets us. It's amazing out there. Definitely now Puerto Rico females have someone to look up to, and I think they were waiting for that.
We both inspire them, and just to continue to our success and continue to do what we do, continue to win and continue to look good winning.
I believe that boxing is like all mental. I believe it's like 90% mental and 10% physical, because there is times that like I don't think I had anything else in me, and then there goes 2, 3, 4 more rounds, and your trainer just like, you can do it, just relax, just zone it out and stuff like that. It's definitely something like, if you want it, and if you want to succeed, and if you want to be great at it, it's all mental. You just got to believe in yourself and do it.
The training is very, very hard. We train 3 times a day, when it's fight time, 7 days a week. It is nonstop, no days off. You know, you want to be the best, you got to train hard and continue to stay on top. Training is running, hitting the bag, sparring, hitting the mids.
And you know, the great thing is that we do it together, because there's days that I feel down and out and I see her grinding and pushing through, and vice versa. She sees, you know, sometimes she's like not into it, but when we work together, we motivate each other, we push each other, you know, definitely if she wasn't around, I definitely would not be as good as I am, and I can guarantee the same thing as her, you know.
We wanted to give back the way people gave us the opportunities. Body and Style magazine, we started to give back to the young people coming up. Their stories just inspire us as well. Like when we sit down and we hear their stories.
It's funny because they're the people in our community. We try to get the people that have a story and are just looking to just branch it out. You know, we have musicians on there, we have artists in there, we have, you know, people in sports and stuff like that that just didn't get like the recognition like we've got, and they just need that little push. That little push, and we try it, and you know, and they're extremely happy.
And for the young girls looking up to me, you know, I'm so determined in the sport I'm in, because I want to be the best. I want to continue to be the best. Just, you know, continue to do what you do, believe in it, and you can conquer the world. I'm extremely proud of my sister. You know, she's the one who got me into the sport. She's so dedicated, she's determined. She really encouraged me to get into the sport. I'm super proud to be her sister.
And Amanda's tremendous. I mean, she's my little sister, but sometimes she has this big heart, and sometimes I feel like she's the big sister. She's a beast in that ring, like there's no other. But outside, you know, she has a big heart. This sport is very competitive, but we never bring that outside of the square circle, outside of the gym. You know, we're loving sisters.
It's great, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here right now. So.
Together, we're like a force.
We're the Serrano sisters, and we're coming, like I said before.
Coming full force.
Yes. We conquer the world together.
The fact that we have a Center for Puerto Rican Studies is something that you can't get anywhere else.
I'd say it's probably the most important research resource for anyone learning about the diaspora.
Centro pinpoints and expresses what Puerto Ricans are all about.
And the journal is unique in that it is the only journal that publishes research articles on the Puerto Rican experience.
It holds our history and protects it, and without Centro, all these materials would be in jeopardy.
Well, I am Boricua, I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm proud of it. I'm an actor, I'm a stand-up comedian, writer, producer, director, teacher. I would love to see us featured the way we are. My film, The Stockroom, deals with universal themes of fear and confidence and love and taking a chance. I mean, that's something that everybody experiences.
It's a big deal for me today, and I just want to celebrate it with somebody that I care about. Lily, I want to show you that I've changed.
I gotta go.
It's a big deal to me that the main three characters in The Stockroom are Puerto Rican. If you're a writer who is Puerto Rican or Latino from another Latino country, and you're an excellent writer, you should be given the opportunity, just like anyone else, to be a writer or a producer or a director. The bigger companies, all they have to do is say, yeah, we're gonna tell that story. You know, I don't wanna see, you know, afro-Latinos as the maid anymore. I don't wanna see them as the babysitter anymore, you know, or as the sidekick. Now here's the thing, we can't rely on that stuff. If I can't get into those doors, I understand the reality. But like I say to some people, there's so many tools, so many ways in which you can get into doors today that there's really no excuse. If we can't get into that door right now, that's fine. Don't let your career end because you can't get there. During the times that it was quiet, I started writing, whether it was a short story, sketches, short films, things like that. And during that time, I realized that I was a pretty good writer. And I said, well, maybe, just maybe, I'm not just an actor. So probably for like a year or two, I sort of trained myself to edit. It empowered me. I felt that finally I was independent. So I decided to direct my first short film, La Operación, the 15-minute narrative about the sterilization of Puerto Rican women during the mid-40s.
¿Y qué es la esterilización?
Es un método en el que se practica una técnica de operación muy sencilla que detiene a su cuerpo de recrear hijos.
When I was going to start doing the research for La Operación, Centro was really, really helpful. They immediately gave me the documentary La Operación to watch. They gave me some literature, and I sat there for the entire week just watching and reading stuff, and I finally was able to come up with the story that I wanted to tell. I'm planning on doing the feature-length version of that film. But I actually want to film that in Puerto Rico. The idea is that I can employ Puerto Rican actors, Puerto Rican crew members from the island to bring money back to the island versus doing it here. In 1998, I worked in a stockroom for a clothing store. The majority of the people that worked in the stockroom were all Latino and African American. I loved just the fun that I had. I loved the people that I worked with.
Are we gonna beat the 10-year mark together? Yeah! Yeah! Well, let me hear you, let me hear you! Yeah! Let me feel you!
So April Hernandez Castillo has been a friend of mine for a while. April has been in a lot of stuff. She was in the movie Freedom Writers, Dexter. She's recently on this new show, Feed the Beast. I always knew that I wanted her to play the character that she does, the role of Tina. She's the girl that's the new girl. In our story, Joseph, it's technically his last day. He's supposed to get promoted to assistant manager, and it's her first day. He's a little bit more on the quieter, shyer side, and she's a little bit more tougher, like straight to the point, no filter. So they kind of complement each other pretty well.
Do you want to dance?
No, I don't dance.
What? Come on!
No.
Come on.
No. I don't know.
I'm very proud of my Puerto Rican community and people and artists and everybody who's always doing something to move us forward. Economic development is important to the community because I can help the immediate issues. If I'm going to shoot something in the community of East Harlem, I want to incorporate something from the neighborhood. All the clothing that we used in the stockroom, we literally donated it to an organization in East Harlem. And what they do is when they sell this clothing, they use that money so that they can produce more programming in the community. My education in theater has helped me to be a better speaker, to communicate with people, to be able to express my ideas. I did this workshop. It was a free workshop for whoever wanted to come, and close to 35 people showed up to this free workshop. I started to find that I was a pretty good teacher. I never thought that I wanted to be a teacher, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed helping people. But if this is important to any one of us, then we gotta work hard for it. Gotta work hard, you've gotta be consistent, because in the end, this is for you, right? It doesn't matter if we become big stars, if we make millions of dollars doing this. If you're happy by doing what you're doing, if it makes you feel good, if you only do it as a hobby because it brings joy to your life, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Some of my Puerto Rican students that come to the class are actors that have worked. Some of them are currently working. Some of them are just starting out. Some of them are accountants or they're chefs. And so some of them come to me because they've always wanted to be an actor and they want to see if this is something they should pursue. And one thing about my class is that it's a very encouraging, positive environment. So starting with Ari, and then we're gonna go clockwise, I want you to share with the class what is amazing about you. And this is the thing that you believe. And maybe you don't fully believe it, but maybe we could think about that today. What's amazing about you? And we'll go down the line. There's been a lot of situations where people never spoke up for themselves. You know, even my own family members may have been taken advantage of and have been too shy didn't want to cause any conflicts, you know, so never really had a voice per se. If I can help and shape Latino voices for the future, if they just get a sense of what their voice is and then are able to continue developing it even after my class, that's also very important to me. When I meet fellow Puerto Ricans, you know, in the neighborhood or back on the island, everybody is really, really proud of the stuff that I've done. If I've contributed to anything when it comes to, you know, folks on the island and Puerto Ricans here in the US, is the inspiration on a spiritual level and just on the level of knowing that you can do it, you can really get things accomplished. It's really just being committed.
Listen, give me a chance to show you that I can do this.
We have things that we want to do, dreams that we want to do, but we're too afraid to take the first step to make it happen. And that can happen to anybody. I'm aware of who I am. I am very grateful for those that came before me and had to kick some of those doors a little bit open so I could slip through that crack. And I'm very grateful, and I'm going to continue working my butt off, you know, to tell my stories as best as I can.
The first story that I heard from my grandmother's lips, Pereza Martina, has been my golden key in opening doors for me everywhere.
It is just a fundamentally unique experience to read about characters that you can identify with. If you just read what she published, you would only have a fraction of a very skewed view of what she was writing. Thank goodness we have her archives here.
A lot of Puerto Ricans were there to build this thing they call hip-hop. And one of the most important crews, besides Zulu Nation, was the Bronx Boys.
TBB, TBG, the Bronx Boys, the Bronx Girls Rocking Crew. It's a rocking crew, started as a graffiti or writing crew, turned into this dance crew, went with the whole dance phenomena of the 70s and 80s, which we today refer to ourselves as b-boying, b-girling, or rocking. But the world, unfortunately, calls it breakdance.
TBB, upon its inception, was an expressive group of males that wanted to express via the art of aerosol art or tagging. We call it graffiti now.
With writing, it was one of the first things in hip-hop.
Graffiti helped a lot of kids go a different route in a more positive way. And the other guys that showed each other was already 10 or 11, showing 9 and 8-year-olds how to do this. And it started little by little with markers and everything, and advanced to the spray paint.
The vibrant colors, you could totally see it in the murals outside in the streets. You know, when I see a mural that has some sort of influence within the culture, I'm like, wow, that kind of reminds me of those beautiful, vibrant, neon colored buildings in Puerto Rico I see with, you know, the blues and the greens and pinks. It just stands out.
You know, the founders, this guy named Cash, he was a graffiti writer, and Shark. And Batch, which he used to write Bat 1, B-A-T-1. Batch wanted to get into the dance. He started getting into the dance more, and he wanted to incorporate that in TBB. Batch took it from there on into more of a dance and a rocking crew.
75, it became a b-boy crew. The expression changed from art to the dance.
Well, back then it was totally different because it was a style that came about in a time where, you know, it wasn't even really accepted. The music style wasn't accepted. The clothing that people wear and how they wore it wasn't really accepted. The expression of dance wasn't accepted. The graffiti, everything that we did wasn't really accepted. So it was really difficult back then, you know, and they didn't even realize, you know, that we was a rocking crew, a Boricua rocking crew at that. You know, it was more of a gang to everyone else because they didn't understand. Ignorance deterred them from actually understanding who we were.
When we grew up, people were scared to see us dance. Cops were arresting us.
Well, we would call like rumbling against other crews, whether it's Lower East Side Manhattan or Brooklyn. Instead of gang fighting, we did gang breakdancing, and we just expressed ourselves through our dance.
What we was doing because we took it as another vice not to fight each other.
Without TBB, a lot of those cats would have been robbing somebody, stealing some, shooting somebody, or doing drugs or something like that, which was very prevalent in the early 70s. And actually, to be honest with you, we lost some people because of things like that. But, you know, again, those kind of things, you know, can be prevented if you have the proper outlet. And, you know, TBB is the outlet as a rocking crew for many.
Most people say a B-boy is a boy that breaks and does, you know, breaking. But B-boy originated from being a boogie boy from the Bronx.
A B-boy and a B-girl is a dancer, basically, who's not afraid to, like, get down on the floor and just express themselves through the break of a song. They're fearless, they're not afraid to go to extremes, to do a crazy move, to stand out from the crowd and express themselves, to do whatever it takes to be amazing in that moment in time.
We moved as a B-boy the way the letters move in a graffiti piece.
It's when they're having that special connection between themselves and the DJ. It's like they're talking to each other, but with a scratch or a certain type of spin or power move.
And we have a dialogue the same way the dancers in Bomba have a dialogue with the drummer. We have our dialogue with the DJ and our dialogue with the crowd.
In a B-boy, B-girl's position, it's when they're just so happy in the moment of the music of that song and that very instant of the floor going crazy and whatnot.
True articulation of the dance is on the floor because it's floor rocking and rocking on top, which what we call top rock. It's a dance. It's not acrobatics. It's not Cirque du Soleil. It's not a sport. It's a dance. But it's treated like a martial arts because you have to be dedicated. You have to live a lifestyle. The lifestyle for a B-boy or B-girl is training to get the next move, you know, not necessarily a trick, but the next expression of your body.
And all you see is his movements, his feeling that he's really into and he's been practicing. You know, he's been taking the time out. And that's what makes another B-boy respect another B-boy, because you take time out to master your craft. You don't just come once in a blue moon and just flop. You know, you're trying to show everything with definition.
We have our own unique style of DJing, MCing, dancing, b-boying, rocking. Different people, different culture, and you take from your background. So the things we learned from our grandparents and our parents, the dancing, the salsa, the mambo, you know, we incorporated that in our dance. Some words that we did that we were rocking, we call it salsa rocking.
By the time the young Boricua kids started doing it, and other Latinos, we brung our hip movements in there that we were doing in the Latin dance movements. You know, the Latin jazz, the machito, and the fania. That was going on at the same time that hip-hop was going on. So, of course, you're going to have a little bit of that influence. We brung in our own style of clothing, too, and our own style of conversation into the whole hip-hop dialogue. This is way before El General and Rico C. You had a little bit of Spanish influence into the MCing and into the DJing, but no one did it as like, I'm the Puerto Rican B-boy, I'm the Puerto Rican DJ. They just did it as, I'm a B-boy, I'm a DJ.
The music, most importantly, is the music, from bomba plena through boogaloo, to Latin, funk, and salsa and stuff like that. And when you hear hip-hop, you hear some influences of like, wow, that beat, that sounds like a bomba plena beat, or oh, that's like a boogaloo, that sounds like Ray Barretto, oh, I like that. Especially when the B-boys and B-girls, when they get down, they listen to that beat, they listen to that break, and boom, there goes the congas.
Because a lot of the people who in the early years were not only from Puerto Rico, but from all of the Caribbean islands. So you had those sounds, those drum patterns, and even the lifestyle. You know, in Jamaica they had the big speakers and everything, and in Puerto Rico you got chicken fights and you got a whole bunch of different things. That energy comes into it. You know, the domino playing with the kapiku. That same energy, you can see it in a B-boy. If you walk around the Bronx, even today, you see how Boricuas interact. You're gonna see how a B-boy may move a certain way. A lot of the most noteworthy graffiti writers are all Boricua to this day. call me biased, but most of the hip hop legends are all Boricua, still. A lot of people gotta understand, you know, b-boying and b-girling started out as a black thing, because hip hop started out as a black thing. It's of the African diaspora. But we definitely have our place in this because it's just an extension of our culture, literally, you know.
You have African Americans that are break dancers, but we were mainly poppers and lockers. The Puerto Ricans took the up rock style, which what we were doing also, and made it their own, using a salsa and everything, and gang fighting into it. You know, so I would say that they have a big influence in break dancing.
Well, because hip-hop is known primarily as an African-American art form, but it's not an art form at all, it's a culture. And it's not an African-American culture to me, it's an expressive culture that was developed by South Bronx inner city youth. It wasn't so much a color thing as it was a class thing.
Being a TBB member, we do our best to change our community. We try to find out what our community needs.
Right now, you know, a lot of these brothers that come, and sisters, actually, let me not forget the women, that come from literally all over the world are our sisters, man, through TBG, Global Family. You know, we embrace them and accept them, and we use the arts, everything that we grew up with back then, to help them stay out of trouble, man.
And now, TBB is a vehicle for social and cultural change. We try to initiate this throughout our communities and globally via the many chapters where we have.
He was able to pull people together.
He was also one that did not focus solely on the Puerto Rican experience in New York, but made bridges to what was happening on the island, what was happening internationally.
I think he got his power from being so rooted in the community.
He changed the discourse. He made us talk about ourselves in broader terms.
I'm one of, and maybe the only photographer in the hip hop culture that came from within the culture. You know, I wasn't sent to document this. And it's important. It's important for the Latinos, and it's important for African Americans, it's important for everybody to document their own culture and not let somebody else document it. And my contribution to the culture of hip hop, to the history of the Bronx, as a person born and raised there, is to document my surroundings. And that's why I love photography so much, because it lets me document things that I love. And through my travels all over the world, because of my photography, I document, you know, my travels. And it's really important. You know, a picture doesn't lie. You know, and I hope through my pictures, I can tell a story of good, bad, and beautiful times. The New York Times called me the man who took hip-hop's baby pictures, so I have some of the earliest images of hip-hop. And in this first photograph is DJ Kool Herc, who is the father of hip-hop, who's considered the father of hip-hop, who started hip-hop, and DJ Tony Tone. Tony Tone and I went to high school together, okay? And this next shot is of the Cold Crush Brothers. Cold Crush Brothers are considered some of the pioneers and bricklayers of the culture of hip-hop. They didn't make but a couple records, but even today, 40 years later, Jay-Z sings about them. Do they have the show Empire in Berlin?
No, they don't.
Okay, there's a famous TV show right now called Empire, And it's like the #1 hit, and they speak about the Koch brothers in this TV show, so that's how famous. This color shot of the Koch brothers is kind of funny because hip hop is made up of so many different types of music. You can see jazz in hip hop music, you can hear rock and roll, punk rock, this, that, so much different, you know? And this is when hip hop was going through that phase of they didn't know what they wanted to do. So this is the punk rock phase where they dress up in tight leather pants and colorful things. This image done by the world famous Catch Crew pays homage to my grandmother, and they use some of my images as references. We will never stop struggling here in the Bronx. Even though they have destroyed it around us, we would pitch tent if we have to rather than move from here. We would fight back. There's nothing we would not do. They will never take us away from here. I feel very much part of this, and I'm never gonna leave. And after me, my children will be here to carry on, and I have very strong grandchildren. So, you know, she's been gone now for almost 84, 94, 2004, almost 30 years. And I'm happy that I'm carrying on her legacy in my photography and in my job as a union vice president. United Bronx Parents is an organization that my grandmother started back in the 60s or 70s. And it's an organization to protect the kids of the Bronx and protect the community as a whole. Years ago, when the migration of Puerto Rican people came to New York City, they were thrown into public education, so my grandmother was instrumental in starting bilingual education. Unheard of. And it was because of her, you know, bilingual education was introduced into the public schools. And she started a whole bunch of other social economic programs like the summer lunch program, the breakfast program, and would feed the kids of the South Bronx. Again, in a club in Harlem World, we didn't have the internet back then, okay? We didn't have cell phones, beepers, or anything like that. So if you wanted to spread the word of hip hop, you would do flyers, you would do posters and stuff and hand them out to the crowds. And this is KG throwing out my pictures to the crowd. Hip hop is one of the only genre of music that incorporates pretty much every style of music. The hearing, the speaking, the culture as a whole. So, you know, jazz doesn't do that, rock and roll doesn't do that, but hip hop borrows from all types of music. And that's why it's accepted across so many different ethnic backgrounds. This isn't a school gymnasium. Like I said, we couldn't do shows in clubs yet because we were too young, but we do them in high school gymnasiums. And you see the basketball rims here, okay? But you would get 400 or 500 kids in there just to see a show. And it probably cost like $2 or $1 to get in. We had our own fan club that would dress up, you know, wearing sweatshirts with the, you know, the group's names on it, their names on it. It was fun. This is an early shot of a skinny Africa Bambaataa, who I considered my father, and he's considered the godfather of hip hop. Charlie Chase, Red Alert, Pow Wow from the Soul Sonic Force. And this was shot at Kips Bay Boys Club. Anybody know who Jennifer Lopez is? Yeah. This is where she learned how to dance, in this boys club here. Being born in New York, you know, I went through some trials and tribulations. You know, I sold my camera equipment, you know, after I took a lot of pictures, because I was dealing with drug abuse, okay? My mother had the foresight or the knowledge to save my negatives. And once I got clean and sober, and I've been clean 24 years now, sin droga, I got all my stuff together, and not knowing that, you know, my work, people wanted to see it, I've been, you know, I put everything together, and I've been traveling the world. My images are shown all over the world. My archives, all my 10,000 film negatives, are deposited at Cornell University. People can go online and do research now. I mean, it's just been a blessing. You know, I was homeless at one time, and through, you know, the grace of God, and, you know, I'm here. My grandmother always said, you know, there's a saying, no hay mal que por bien no venga. You know, so I take from whatever bad happened and I take some good out of it. And my trials and tribulations of being homeless and living in the street made me into the man I am today. I'm here sitting talking to you, talking to the people in Puerto Rico about who I am as a Latino, and that there is hope. There is hope for everybody. And this kid from the South Bronx is going to Paris tomorrow. This kid from the South Bronx has been to Bulgaria, London, Japan, Korea, Amsterdam. This kid from the South Bronx, this Latino Puerto Rican, has been all over the world. So, you know, that's the message I have to my family everywhere.
I'm a Rican, defining my own way, anyway.
Tato is one of the most important New Rican poets, but he's also a major poet.
He truly captured the essence of so many people who walk the streets of New York that no one sees and no one listens to and no one knows.
Tato has written his legacy with the poetry in his life.
I think that I've always been aware of being Puerto Rican and Black Puerto Rican because my parents were first generation. My father was from Loíza and African descendant of Puerto Rico. I was brought up in New York City. I'm Puerto Rican, and that intercontextuality of my experience drove the creation of the Caribbean Cultural Center. The mission of the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute is to look at the African contributions and traditions and continued manifestations of the traditions that are rooted in Africa in the Americas. And in the United States, you learn about the African-American U.S. experience, and you do not learn about the incredible, impactful contributions that African descendants have made from Latin, Central, and the Caribbean. We do work at the elementary school, we do work with artists, we do work at the junior high school level in terms of technology. We do work at the college level. And we've done conferences in Nigeria, Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, Trinidad, Santo Domingo, Venezuela, Argentina, Uruguay, you know what I mean? So that the work has been enriching, and it has been a process of us learning so that then we can present it to our public. In the diaspora, we don't learn about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not part of the conversation or the learning of our young people. And they feel dislocated because they don't understand their experience. You're Puerto Rican, why? You're Puerto Rican, what makes you a Puerto Rican? It's not only rice and beans and pastel at Christmas, right? It's a mentality, it's an understanding of tradition, of value, of those people who have made a contribution to history. And by the exclusion of our experience in the educational process, by generations of exclusion, then you become invisible.
I identify as Afro-Latina, so whenever I would search this term, I would come across Dr. Martha Moreno Vega being such a champion for the issues, for being reflected, for identity when it comes to being Black in the Latin American context.
The conversations that you are able and the content that we disseminate in social media is pretty much like a product of our own conversations that we have internally as an institution.
We advocate for social media because we like the idea of creating spaces. Like, for instance, we do a bunch of events throughout the year, but actually occupying spaces online and, you know, rallying against issues that affect African descendants, that's, to me, is very powerful. So on our Twitter, they'll find current issues, they'll find historic issues and articles and tidbits. And on our Facebook, that's where we have the most audience. But we also want to stay very current and provide people just a safe space for people to have these conversations.
The type of media that we disseminate is really important so people can actually see themselves. I think that reflection really assists people in the process of finding themselves and understanding that we is our birthright to have a place in the world and a voice in this world.
New York is the representation of the world. You have Asian, Native American, Latino, the breakout of Dominican, Panamanian, lo que sea. But yet, even though we're the majority population in New York City, the funding to our institutions are less than acceptable. So that to maintain an institution takes dedication, commitment, takes a group of people, because I don't do it by myself. It takes a group of people that love their culture, that love themselves. We have staff that are artists in the schools and have worked in the schools. We have an education coordinator who approaches the schools and talks about our programming. The importance of education is key, but the content of that education is more key. Because if you have an education that's lacking the reflection of the population that you're teaching, then that is miseducation. And our role is to provide an education that is inclusive. We have to learn to respect and value the other, so the others will respect and value us. So that in our work, what we're presenting is information that young people, our leadership, our future leadership would not have if the Caribbean Cultural Center didn't exist. So for us, it's a continuous process of researching information, documenting information, developing programming to share that information within the school system, outside the school system, to the broader community that we represent in New York City and in the nation. Well, I'm very happy to announce that we've renovated a firehouse, a historic firehouse, and it's on 125th Street between Lexington and Park. What is beautiful and why we wanted to be in East Harlem is because it's still a sense of community. And if you don't have a nation that has community, you, in my opinion, are destroying the fabric of what it is to be human. Because we all need community. We're a humankind. We're a social animal. You walk around and la gente te dice, buenos días, ¿cómo está? You know, there is that sense of community, and we still can salvage it. And I hope that the center is part of that. The reality is that if we're not in it together, in terms of working together to support our families, to support our community, then there's a deficit. Our reality is that we're fluid, and, you know, not only in gender terminology, but in experience, in education, and in the knowledge base that we bring. So that to label, to me, is scary, because I've been labeled and I refuse to be labeled.
When I think of Clemente Sotobelli,
extraordinary and inspiring.
Arrebatarle a la ignorancia todo el poder que tiene. Eso es ser poeta.
Un gran poeta, un gran luchador.
He was genuinely committed to both the art form and its liberational qualities.
Y no estar conforme con nada nunca. Eso es ser poeta.
My name is Noel Quiñones, and I'm an Afro-Boricua spoken word poet from the Bronx. Puerto Rican culture was influential in hip-hop, but also salsa in New York City. And salsa is that mix. And coming from the Bronx, the cultures were mixed, the music was mixed, the traditions were mixed, everything was mixed all the time. And that is how I feel that the Bronx really is in every poem that I do, because I always try to keep a cadence and keep a rhythm, regardless of what I'm writing about. It permeates everything when I was growing up, and so I want that rhythm to permeate everything when I perform a poem. This poem is called For Tato La Viera, or Bomba. I drop bombs, bombs, bomb, bomb, bomba, 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 bomba. Y la plena, con la bomba, con la bomba, con la bomba. Y la plena, con la bomba, con la bomba, con la bomba. Y la plena. I drop bombs every time I pen better. New Rican bomb splatter. This is lyric over matter. Now my head is storyteller. Quiet, hear the pitter patter. Starting in the second chapter. Final passage, vocal rapture. Ending and beginning. So scream it faster. Screaming wepa like a campo wide disaster. Funny those viejos thought this music wouldn't last. Huh. I've stuck so long with poetry because it's these stories that I can weave together, but more specifically spoken word because of that energy. It pushes it a little bit farther, where it's not just someone reading your poem, but getting your energy, your tonality, your vocals, your body language, that all adds to this space that I believe slam poetry event creates. Coded Dino gold, lock load my chamber, revolving roulette to reflect the labor, an air pocket snap to release a stranger. He greets me on the page, stage, a vomit ranger. Pero un momento es que el sacero, in mi mente he dances like a rebel, moves like air 3 feet to the treble. I tremble, God Dinos think you're so special, pero, pare. My school did an amazing job of telling us that we had a voice. But the voice I was looking for didn't exist in the curriculum. And so what I ended up doing my 3rd year of high school was I went on this huge research binge. I wanted to know as much as I could about Puerto Rican history, about Puerto Rican leaders, about Puerto Rican movements that was not being given to me in any class, in any forum, in English literature or history. So much has been forgotten, and so much has been covered up, and so much is not readily available, that I feel that I can do that I have this art form. I've worked on this craft for so long that I now have the opportunity to perform a history in such a way that it's accessible, that it can be remembered in a different way, in a modern context, is exciting, and people are enjoying that. And because it's so popular, a lot of people in the community are using it to tell histories that are not in the textbooks. That's the beauty of spoken word. It's not just me, it's not just the poems, it's the audience who receives them and how they receive them. My mind moves like bomba. Pure Africano hymn, it was brought on the backs of sugar slaves from Africa to Puerto Rico, where I'm from. It's as if everyone moves with 2 left feet because they knew they had a right one. My people move in 3s, from Africa to Puerto Rico to America, from countryside to boat to city, from drummer to dancer to audience, from bomba to plena to salsa. This is the storyline that you are not used to. The topics and themes I write about are centered around, obviously, Puerto Rican history, but also my identity as an afro-Latino, specifically an afro-Boricua, and trying to kind of understand that, again, within today's context of what it means to be afro-Latino during a time that Black Lives Matter exists and during a time that the Puerto Rican debt crisis is happening. So a lot has been around identity, around me growing up in the Bronx, separate of kind of my race and ethnicity, just, I guess, childhood. And again, all of it trying to understand Puerto Rican identity overall. The way that in the beginning nothing is ever right, but we, Dino brass bone boom, try our best, stumbling as things considered dirt always do to shake that which has been forgotten, yet we always be perceiving that which has been forgotten. Afro-Boricua for me is the acknowledgement and the acceptance and the bringing in of the fact that Puerto Ricans, at least in this context, have ancestry that comes from Spain, from the indigenous people of the island, the Tainos, and from Africa, because of the African slave trade. And so with all those coming together, it's this acceptance that all 3 exist, but also getting rid of the idea that all 3 exist equally. And so there's been this myth that exists, that Puerto Ricans are an equal third of all three. And it's simply not true statistically or genetically. And the reason that that's important is because for a long time, not only did many Puerto Ricans in my family believe that all three existed equally, but they always raised the Spanish ancestry first. And while that always existed, no one ever wanted to say that, you know, we might have connections to African tribes or different African peoples, as well as the indigenous roots that we have in the Taínos, who were there when conquerors first came to the island. And so Afro-Boricua is my kind of taking back of that identity, of that truth that exists now that we have so much more information. And it's me naming myself. Feel it like a Espiritu thinking, what if the Caribbean had it right? The way I wasn't raised learning Spanish but have a Puerto Rican accent when I speak tongues. The way my best friend's body knew how to dance bachata before he ever understood that we move like God is watching my mind. Moves like bomba in a constant three-part conversation. Can't find the beginning to a song, the middle to a rap verse, or the end to a poem. Just a genre of madness. The way a bomba drummer creates a tapestry of stories within their throat, each layered within the next. The way a bomba dancer, moving, weaving, searching the madness. The way the audience watches for transcendence, porque when I scream, huepa, that is the closest I ever feel to God. I don't believe in just performing. That every time I book a show, I always want to say, if it's in a college or a school, I want to say that I offer workshops and I offer community discussions, because it's so important to understand that, again, we are not just those few minutes that we go on a stage and read a poem, that we're also figuring ourselves out. We also have other things that we want to express in different ways. And so the poetry is kind of a trick for me to get in, because I just love talking with people and building community.
The fact that we have a Center for Puerto Rican Studies is something that you can't get anywhere else.
I'd say it's probably the most important research resource for anyone learning about the diaspora.
Centro pinpoints and expresses what Puerto Ricans are all about.
And the journal is unique in that it is the only journal that publishes research articles on the Puerto Rican experience.
It holds our history and protects it, and without Centro, all these materials would be in jeopardy.
Hi, I'm Sonia Manzano. I've spent most of my life being Maria on Sesame Street, but now I am an author and also an actor, but mostly an author. I'll never forget the first time I saw Sesame Street. I was a student at Carnegie Mellon University. It was very exciting, especially when they cut away to Susan and Gordon on the street, this charming African-American couple. In 1969, you did not see people of color on television, and you sure didn't see them talking to you from like an El Barrio neighborhood. In a neighborhood that looked like many of the neighborhoods I had been raised in. So that was the first time I saw it. I loved it immediately. I actually thought I could do this show. If it hadn't been for Sesame Street, I don't know where I would have ended up. I know I would have ended up in the arts somehow, but I actually had this vision of myself being a regional theater actress, because in regional theater, they do a lot of the classics, Shakespeare. And anybody of any color can do classics. But I didn't see any modern plays that I could be in. You didn't see Latins in plays. I didn't know what role I was gonna play, so I thought, well, I'll just try to do Shakespeare. But thankfully I fell into Sesame Street. But I always loved television. I used to, even though I said I never saw anybody like myself, I used to love the black and white movies. I would die for Top Hat, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing around. And one of the first pieces I wrote for Sesame Street was Maria and Emilio dressed up like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, doing a song, a very famous, doing a song that I wrote the lyrics called You Say Hola and I Say Hola. The reason that I got cast on Sesame Street, along with Emilio Delgado, who's Mexican-American, was because Mexican activists on the West Coast saw that Susan and Gordon were great role models for African-American children, and they decided that Sesame Street should have role models for Latino kids. It was their activism that created the need to have me on the show. And of course, Sesame Street said, okay, cool, so we'll audition some actors. I was lucky to be one of them. So that's how I got on the show. The reason I got on the show was so that Latino kids would have somebody to relate to. We were gonna close the education gap, eliminate racism, very idealistic time. In retrospect, as far as my contribution to bringing Latino stars on the show, I think it's interesting that I brought in Puerto Rican talent. Because I'm Puerto Rican. I was born and raised in born in Manhattan, but raised in the Bronx. And the first talent that I thought of bringing was Ray Barretto. And then because my parents played so much traditional Puerto Rican music, it was something that I loved. And Los Pioneros de la 21 were it. You have to understand that at that era, there were hardly any Puerto Rican actors that the show could pick from. There was a very small Latino acting pool. We were invisible. Nobody knew who Tito Puente was. Only in our community we knew who Tito Puente was. The bigger world did not know who Tito Puente was. They knew who Mongo Santa Maria was because he was a big megastar in the jazz world, but people like Ray Barretto were famous amongst the Latinos in the Latin community. So they were not called upon to participate on Sesame Street. I was raised in a very chaotic environment. There was domestic violence in my house, and I watched television as comfort. I used to lose myself in those musicals. So when I got on Sesame Street and I was Maria, I always used to remember that. And I used to think, there's kids out there that are watching me for an hour of sanity and comfort. People say often that you overcome a difficult childhood to be a success. As I said, I had a difficult childhood. There were restraining orders, there was violence, but I don't think I overcame that to become a success. I think that I became a success because of that. I started writing scripts for Sesame Street, and that was great. And then Sesame Street started to sort of expand the cast and shoot less shows, so I had more time on my hands, and I had a lot of creative energy. So I wrote the picture book of No Dogs Allowed. And it's a memoirette, I thought. They're all little stories of really things that happened to me. And then I wrote A Box Full of Kittens, and that's also based on a true story. It's a story that all kids could relate to. It's about being empowered. All humans can relate to that feeling. It just happens to take place in a Puerto Rican environment. I have always been working on a memoir, but another book got in the way, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, which takes place in 1969 when the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican activist group, took over a church in El Barrio. It was the first time that I saw Latinos make a political stance. And all of a sudden they were saying things about being proud to be Puerto Rican, and I said, what? Trying to make believe we're not. And they were bringing all of this up out in the open. They were the ones who were embracing how Puerto Ricans can be African and saying, guess where the bomba came from? That's black. And that was shocking. So I wrote a book, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, and it's a girl coming of age, finally being comfortable with being Puerto Rican, but she's caught between her nationalist Puerto Rican grandmother and her docile mother. And she thinks she has to choose between them. It's a young adult novel. And then finally, I got into writing my own memoir. Writing children's books that have Latino themes and Latino people in them is a way that I can continue to contribute to the community. I'm very interested in children and how they see the world. And I'm really interested in immigrant children because they really are seeing many worlds at the same time. And I hope to write literature that they can appreciate, that appreciates that they have that disparate ideas about things.
The first story that I heard from my grandmother's lips, Pereza Martina, has been my golden key in opening doors for me everywhere.
It is just a fundamentally unique experience to read about characters that you can identify with. If you just read what she published, you would only have a fraction of a very skewed view of what she was writing. Thank goodness we have her archives here.
I took inspiration in the case of this workshop from photography of kite flying on the rooftops of East Harlem in the 1960s. And so this is an age-old tradition that travels from Puerto Rico to New York and becomes a New Yorican tradition here, really, on the rooftops of places like El Barrio, really, in any Puerto Rican community. You had this all over the city in the 60s and 70s, but it's one of those traditions that's also kind of disappeared. You know, you could argue that also on the island this is a kind of a disappearing tradition, that paper kites and handmade kites got replaced by plastic kites, and that's my experience. I'm the plastic kite generation as well. So today we did a workshop that was trying to reconnect the past with the present and sort of reactivate these old traditions. Really speaks to the way things in the community have changed, but how difficult things were back then, that children could escape to the rooftops as a safe space, and a space where you could literally sort of escape to the sky and fly your kites and have a conversation with people blocks away who were flying kites as well, and sort of have these competitions in the sky, and always looking up, always sort of like imagining and sort of testing the boundaries of what you could control and not control in the sky. And I mean, I think for me that was just a really poetic thing to think about. And it's sort of an era that's gone. It's not something that happens in New York today. But it reminds me also of the social circumstances that made the rooftops safer than the streets, you know, in the 60s or 70s. In today's workshop, we talked a lot about the symbolism of kites, about freedom, and about how that was explored as a community, how it was thought about in the 60s and 70s how it's thought about today. All around us were images of the young lords, you know, and images of what they struggled and fought for in terms of fighting against police brutality, fighting for things like housing, education, health, food.
Side of this gentleman's kite.
Right.
Much smaller. This was called a cappuccino. What we used to call it. It's made out of paper. Where you write on?
Yeah, like notebook paper?
Like a notebook paper?
Yeah.
And it only flew so far.
The thing what's really special about today is that it's a living history. You know, the voices of the past are the voices of the present in many ways. And so connecting generations from now together to understand sort of these historic links and how our community is still struggling, but how it also still bonds together, you know, when we create that opportunity is important. And so in some ways the Kite Workshop itself is sort of a way of just inviting people to come back and have conversations that connect us back to one another. And, you know, and culture is the place that we're connecting to begin with. It's amazing to imagine it now just because it's such a different, now you can't go to the rooftops. Kids don't go to the rooftops.
No, kids don't go to the rooftop. They go to open space.
Yeah.
That's where you find kites.
So
because open space for us was the roof.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't fly kites in the street because you have buildings.
Today we had a workshop that was a public program of the exhibition Anchor, which is an exhibition here in East Harlem centered on the photography of Iram Maristani. Iram is a photographer who has documented El Barrio from the 60s and 70s to now, and was an original member of the Young Lords, was their official photographer. He documented an incredible period in this community's history where people stood up, took action, and made a difference in this community that you can still feel today. Kites for me are symbolically always about flying and freedom, and explore the questions of what freedom means to different people in different parts of the world. And that's something that I've always been drawn to in terms of the symbolism of kites, but also in terms of the act of flying kites, you know, which in itself can be sort of a liberating feeling.
was able to pull people together.
He was also one that did not focus solely on the Puerto Rican experience in New York, but made bridges to what was happening on the island, what was happening internationally.
I think he got his power from being so rooted in the community.
He changed the discourse. He made us talk about ourselves in broader terms.
El Puente is a nonprofit organization that started 34 years ago, and its mission is to nurture and inspire leaders for peace and justice. The Green Light District is a 10-year initiative to green, grow, and sustain the south side of Williamsburg, meaning the neighborhood where this program is located and for whom El Puente serves. The 5 areas of focus in the Green Light District are arts and culture, health and wellness, affordable living, environmental justice and open spaces, and education. Climate change has become not just like a fashionable thing to talk about or to discuss or to even consider. It's a reality for a lot of people, and we see it. This generation in particular is a generation that's going to have to deal with the consequences of climate change in a way that no other generation had.
This neighborhood has always had very high air pollution. We're surrounded by the BQE, which is the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, the Williamsburg Bridge, bus depot, and the train station on Marcy.
The BQE has 100,000 vehicles passing by every single day, and that of course impacts health. It impacts the air quality people are breathing. It impacts the people that are using the parks and open spaces available here, which I have to say are also very scarce and very neglected.
Years ago, this was an industrial area, so it's not the first time that we've been surrounded by this.
We're still coping with very high asthma levels. People here still suffer from that because the pollution sources are still there. Some have been mitigated, there's less industrial activity, but it's still an issue. We need to create strategies that can transform Brooklyn into a more renewable energy borough.
The Green Jobs for New York is a statewide initiative, but El Puente is only focusing in Brooklyn to help homeowners, multifamily building owners, to become energy efficient, and so they can also reduce their energy cost and therefore save money and ultimately help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. I feel very good to be part of this organization because it impacts the community in a positive way. You know, we want to empower also the people. There's the option of going renewable, or they can do something better for the communities, like beautifying their parks.
We've done a lot of beautification activities throughout the year. We've been planting trees and flowers, and we also have a community garden, which is 2 blocks away. It's probably one of the first community gardens in North Brooklyn. So we are very proud of our garden, and it is a pretty big garden as well. Kids like going out to parks and playgrounds, and we're aware of the fact that they don't have any real, park in the neighborhood to go to. Currently, the South Side as a neighborhood has less than half an acre per 1,000 residents.
We have now gotten together and decided that we're gonna head and do a campaign towards open spaces and air quality in Williamsburg.
And in particular with the current project that we have been developing, which is our Urban Lab for Open Spaces, we were also pleasantly surprised about how much the kids care about this, and their optimism about the campaign, because many of them have, if they don't have asthma, they know someone that has asthma.
When we go to the parks, we do 3 different things. We do park surveys. Who's using the park? How many people are in the park? What are the ages of the people?
When I interview people, I always ask, what do they want to see, any improvements? And they always come up with, most people always say the same thing. And a lot of people are just well, I like that people are coming out here and interviewing us because I feel like I have a say, and I feel like this should be done in this park.
We do counts of trucks.
The last time that I was counting trucks, I got up to 454 trucks in an hour.
Today we normally come to the park, and with my group we have an air monitor, and we set up the air monitor by the highway. We Bluetooth it to a phone so that way we can track down the temperature, the air quality. I feel like Up One Day is amazing. I've been here for a couple of years now, and I worked out a couple of centers that they have, and I work with their kids, and I feel like it's a huge opportunity for youth to get into the community. I feel like I'm making a difference because at the end of the day, all these kids, they're gonna have a better park, and they're gonna feel safe, and this park is gonna be better maintained for so the kids, they never have to worry about falling or not having the gates closed when they're playing and whatnot.
What I enjoy about doing this is that I'm helping my community. Yeah, because this is where I live, so I will want this to be a better place. And if I want to go in a park, I don't want to be affected.
I think the Puerto Rican community is a crucial part of the city's identity. And through that, I think that being here in New York, because we're at the forefront of so many social changes and social ideas, and there's also a lot more access to funding, we can push those ideas forward in a way that maybe Puerto Rico as an island can't. And even though they have many challenges, it's important for them to know that they have support here, that there's people that are fighting for them, and that they want to help, and that they're very interested in bridging both the communities here, the diaspora here, and the island together.
I'm a Rican, finding my own way, anyway.
Tato is one of the most important New Rican poets, but he's also a major poet.
He truly captured the essence of so many people who walk the streets of New York that no one sees, and no one listens to, and no one knows.
Tato has written his legacy with the poetry in his life.
I've been drawing all my life.
I was always like that when I was a little boy.
But my brother gave me his comic collection.
I've been collecting comics probably since I was 8 or 9 years old.
Drawing, doodling characters I've seen on TV.
Drawing in my math books when I should have been learning math.
It's just a nice feeling when you meet like-minded people who also happen to be Puerto Rican, who also think that, we should definitely be represented in a more positive light.
An illustrator.
I'm an illustrator and digital artist and colorist.
I've been drawing comics professionally over 20 years.
This is the cover to Spawn 200. It was drawn by Mark Silvestri, inked by Todd McFarlane, and colored by myself.
This is a splash page from an issue I think it was my first issue of Detective Comics.
I've always been an advocate for our community, and now that I find myself working within the comic book industry, I feel that the Latinos in the comic book industry are oftentimes very much underrepresented, or for that matter, not celebrated. As the Center for Puerto Rican Studies exists to archive, document, and celebrate our Puerto Rican culture, I felt the necessity to add to that and to diversify its archive and diversify its realm of celebration.
I was invited with other Puerto Rican artists to partake in this sort of like information gathering, answering questions.
I think it's always nice to be able to see someone who looks like you, someone who probably grew up the same experiences that you did, same household, ate the same food, or just sort of shared the same culture that you did, that is also doing something that you love. Maybe there was someone here today who wants to do comics. Maybe they didn't really know if there were others like them doing it. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter what you are.
Now I'm starting to think of my art as a professional kind of media. Now before it was for fun, it was hobby.
I did one issue of Detective that featured a character, Renee Montoya. So when I drew that issue, I think it was probably the only time I had drawn like a Latina character.
There's this black Spider-Man, there's this thing, and you rarely hear the Spanish side, and I think it's very important. Everyone else seems to be raising their flag, so damn right the Puerto Rican flag should be raised on this occasion. People were genuinely, they were very into it, very enthusiastic. They had tons of questions, they had smiles on their faces. I was pleasantly surprised when I got there that the crowd just kept filling up.
I've seen many documentaries, and I wasn't really aware on the pressures of being an illustrator.
You're not aware of who is what in comics. It's a faceless industry. You'll see a name and you're not sure if they're Filipino, if they're Puerto Rican, if they're Dominican. So for us to kind of say, yes, we are Puerto Rican and this is what we are doing is really important.
We need a hero. We need a symbol. We need something. And that's kind of like the foundation that inevitably led to the creation of La Borinqueña.
I wanted to do something that created community, like the community that created who I am. And I also wanted to do something for these brothers up here.
I think he started something amazing, because this is something I've never seen before. I've told him, I've never seen a character like this before. I think people are gonna love it, and it's just like, people can relate. And I feel like that's part of a strong story, is that people can relate to it, and you create a dialogue and a discussion, and I think that's what he's done with La Borinqueña.
Puerto Rican youth in the United States, the continental United States, really need to hear what's going on in Puerto Rico. They don't get enough information about Puerto Rico, and La Borinqueña is a perfect vehicle for that, because not only is she an educational tool, she's also a tool for awareness.
Everyone actually on the panel actually worked on the poster, which is actually the first time that 9 Puerto Rican artists came together to actually work on something that actually worked within the genre of comic book art.
I received so much amazing feedback from so many women because they want to get into the industry. They want to be able to create, to illustrate, to be able to be one day celebrated in a forum like Café con Comics.
I think it's important for other people to see people like them and think, yeah, I can do it. I can do that, because she's doing it. She's also Puerto Rican, she's a girl, she can draw.
Who knows, maybe some of the very artists that were in that room may actually come back a few years later and say, if it wasn't for that event, I wouldn't have had the courage to step up and pursue my dreams. And that's not the only reason why I produce these events, for the sake of creating a space where not only as an artist you're celebrated, but as an individual participating, you're inspired, and that you can take something and you can claim ownership for yourself.
When I think of Clemente Sotobelli,
extraordinary and inspiring.
Arrebatarle a la ignorancia todo el poder que tiene. Eso es ser poeta.
Un gran poeta, un gran luchador.
He was genuinely committed to both the art form and its liberational qualities.
Y no estar conforme con nada nunca. Eso es ser poeta.
I grew up in the South Bronx. I collected bottles and cans every week to save up enough money to buy comic books. Something drew me to these stories, these characters that always fought for a better world. So I thought, if I can create a superhero, then perhaps I could use this as a vehicle to talk about what's really happening in Puerto Rico.
Faster than a speeding bullet.
DC Comics came to us. We created a 200-page book that teamed up La Borinqueña with Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, and it led to close to $250,000 of sales. And it's evolved now into an incredibly successful grants program. Over the course of 3 years that we developed this program, we've distributed close to $140,000 in grants to local grassroots organizations that are doing incredible work in communities that are always overlooked and don't have access to larger granting possibilities that are available here in the United States. Organizations that work with children in areas of academic studies and literacy, organizations that are committed to fighting for environmental justice, organizations that celebrate and preserve Afro-Puerto Rican heritage, reflections of our character. Our mental health, our minds need to be rebuilt and put back together. So we give our resources to organizations that are committed to continue the work after the disasters happen, after Hurricane Maria, after the earthquakes that have been hitting Puerto Rico since late December, as well as the mega one that hit on the morning of Los Tres Reyes. And the island is literally still suffering through earthquakes, and engineers are trying to figure out how does the island rebuild in the midst of these catastrophes still actually occurring. In 2020, we're going to be announcing very soon our third annual La Borinqueña Grants Program request for proposals process. This summer, when we return to Puerto Rico, we will be distributing more grants to organizations that are continuing to rebuild Puerto Rico. Beyond just cutting a check, beyond just showing up, we also have other ways of supporting Puerto Rico. And directly with our work is through our books, it's through our stories, it's through our characters. And we're engaging other ways of fundraising, like entering into a space of using social media by finding ourselves in partnerships with companies like Pixelbank, a brand new company that's actually engaging people in this love of social media to translate that into a form of actual donations. When we brought together Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and the rest of the DC universe to team up with La Borinqueña, we published a book called The Reconstruction. Puerto Rican construction, like the word reconstruction, but reconstruction, which really engages people in the concept that Puerto Rico itself has to be an active participant in its own reconstruction, and that we need to support this island in their efforts to rebuild themselves.